Hey everyone, welcome back to Mindful English. I'm Sarah, and I'm sitting here with Liam.
Hey everyone, good to be here.
Liam, do you ever feel like you have massive goals, but can't seem to start working on them?
I have a confession to make. I have massive goals. I want to write a book, I want to master a new language, and I want to run a marathon. But yesterday, instead of doing any of those things, I spent 3 hours lying on my couch scrolling through my phone. I have this constant, exhausting battle in my brain. I am incredibly ambitious, but I am also incredibly lazy.
I am ambitious, but lazy. Liam, you just perfectly described the ultimate modern paradox. It is one of the most viral, relatable feelings on the internet right now. You want to change the world, but you also desperately want to take a nap.
Exactly. And it feels terrible because you aren't actually relaxing on the couch. You are sitting there feeling guilty, completely weighed down by the massive gap between your grand vision and your absolute lack of execution.
But here is the psychological truth, and this is going to be a huge relief. You are not actually lazy. Laziness is apathy. A truly lazy person doesn't care. They are perfectly happy doing nothing. But if you are ambitious, doing nothing causes you intense anxiety. You aren't lazy. You are paralyzed.
So today, we are going to dive into the psychology of why high achievers completely freeze up. And we are going to give you the exact mental hacks to finally bridge the gap between your dreams and your reality.
Let's get into it.
Let's start with phase 1, the diagnosis. If we aren't lazy, what is actually stopping us from taking action?
It comes down to two major psychological traps. The first one is perfectionism. When you have massive ambition, your vision of success is flawless. You want to launch the perfect business or speak perfect English. But reality is messy. So your brain subconsciously decides, if I don't start, I can't fail. You continuously put off the work because the fantasy of success feels safer than the messy reality of being a beginner.
Wow, you put it off to protect your ego. I could be amazing at this. I just haven't tried yet. That is so accurate.
And it's insidious because it feels like you're being strategic. You tell yourself, I'm just waiting for the right time, or I need to do more research first. But really, you're just protecting yourself from the vulnerability of being bad at something.
Which is terrifying for high achievers, because we're used to being good at things. The idea of being a complete beginner again is humiliating.
Exactly. And that fear keeps you stuck in an endless loop of preparation without execution. You keep planning, researching, organizing, but never actually doing.
And that leads perfectly into the second trap, which is the dopamine illusion. I am so guilty of this. I will sit at my desk, buy a beautiful new notebook, and spend 2 hours perfectly mapping out my entire 10-year plan.
And how do you feel after you write that plan?
I feel amazing. I feel incredibly productive, but I haven't actually done anything.
Exactly. And that is the trap. When you sit around daydreaming and mapping out your goals, your brain releases dopamine, the exact same reward chemical it releases when you actually achieve something. You get the emotional reward of success without doing any of the hard work. It is fake productivity.
So our brains literally can't tell the difference between planning to do something and actually doing it?
Not in that moment, no. The dopamine hit feels identical. That's why vision boards and goal-setting workshops can actually backfire. You walk out feeling so accomplished that your brain thinks you've already succeeded, and it loses the urgency to actually execute.
That's fascinating and terrifying. So what happens when the dopamine fades?
Eventually, the dopamine fades, and you realize you still have to execute the plan. The reality feels too heavy, so you just give up and go back to the couch. And then the guilt cycle starts all over again.
That is mind-blowing. We are literally addicted to planning and terrified of executing.
So, how do we fix it? How do we cure the ambitious but lazy syndrome? Let's move to phase 2, the antidote. The antidote is surprisingly simple, but it requires a complete shift in your mindset. Hack number 1 is you have to dramatically lower the bar.
Lower the bar? But I'm ambitious. I want the bar to be high.
I know, but your high bar is exactly what is paralyzing you. You have to separate the visionary in your brain from the worker. The visionary sets the massive goal. I will write a 300-page novel. But if you give that goal to the worker will completely panic and freeze. You have to give the worker a ridiculously easy task. You tell your brain, today I am just going to write one terrible, messy paragraph. You lower the bar so much that it is impossible to fail.
I love that. You completely remove the friction. It's like what we've talked about before with making things so easy your brain can't resist.
Exactly. And here's the beautiful part. Once you write that one terrible paragraph, momentum kicks in. You realize it wasn't as scary as you thought. Your brain relaxes, and suddenly you might write 2 paragraphs or 3. But you never required yourself to do that. You only committed to 1.
So you trick yourself into starting by making the commitment laughably small.
Precisely. And that brings us to hack number 2. Action precedes motivation. This is the big mindset shift. We always think we need to feel motivated before we start. We sit on the couch waiting for a magical wave of energy to hit us. But neurobiology shows us that dopamine, the motivation chemical, is released after you take action, not before.
So you just have to blindly dive in?
You have to dive in even when you feel exhausted. You just force yourself to do 5 minutes of terrible, messy work. Once you start, the brain says, "Oh, we are doing this now." The dopamine kicks in, and suddenly you have the energy to follow through and finish the task.
That completely flips the script. Instead of waiting to feel ready, you just start, and readiness follows.
Yes, and I want to be really honest with our listeners about this. The first 2 minutes of starting are going to feel awful. Your brain is going to scream at you to stop. It's going to give you a million reasons why you should check your phone or get a snack or reorganize your desk.
But if you can just push through those 2 minutes...
If you can push through those 2 minutes, the resistance starts to dissolve. Your brain chemistry literally shifts, and the work starts to feel less painful. Sometimes it even becomes enjoyable.
So it's not about being superhuman or having endless willpower. It's about understanding the biology and working with it instead of against it.
Exactly. You stop judging yourself for being lazy, and you start actively managing your perfectionism.
You stop dreaming and you start doing the messy work.
And you give yourself permission to be bad at it. That's the key. The ambitious person's greatest enemy is the need to be good immediately.
Now, to make sure our listeners can accurately describe this complex psychological state in English, let's do a quick review of the phrases we used today.
We used some fantastic phrases to describe the gap between ambition and action. Let's start with the feeling of guilt. You mentioned sitting on the couch feeling completely weighed down by your lack of action.
Right. To be weighed down by something means to feel heavily burdened or depressed by a problem or responsibility. I was weighed down by all the unfinished projects on my to-do list.
And we promised to help our listeners bridge the gap between their dreams and reality.
To bridge the gap is a powerful idiom. It means to connect two disconnected things, or to reduce the difference between where you are and where you want to be. We need to bridge the gap between our current skills and the job requirements.
But to do that, you have to stop procrastinating. I mentioned that perfectionists constantly put off the work.
To put off means to delay doing something until a later time because it feels too intimidating. I kept putting off the phone call because I was nervous.
Instead of working, we spend hours mapping out our future. To map out means to plan something in extensive, meticulous detail. Before the trip, we mapped out every single stop along the way.
But planning isn't doing. To fix this, you have to intentionally lower the bar.
To lower the bar means to drastically reduce your standards or expectations, making a task much easier to start. I lowered the bar and decided to just exercise for 5 minutes instead of an hour.
Once you make it easy, you just have to dive in, meaning you start doing an activity immediately and enthusiastically without overthinking it. I stopped planning and just dove in.
And once you start, the motivation will arrive, allowing you to finally follow through. To follow through means to complete a task or a promise that you started, all the way to the very end. He always starts projects but never follows through.
And if you want more expressions for talking about goals, motivation, and productivity, check the pinned comment below.
You stop using simple words like lazy or tired, and you start explaining the true, complex mechanics of your brain.
So here's our challenge. What is one ambitious goal you have been putting off?
Maybe it's learning English. Maybe it's starting a business. Maybe it's writing that book. Tell us in the comments.
And then tell us, how can you lower the bar to start it today? What's the smallest possible first step you can take?
Maybe instead of, I'll study English for an hour, you say, I'll listen to one English sentence. Maybe instead of, I'll write a book, you say, I'll write one terrible sentence.
And if this episode helped you see that you're not lazy, that you're just paralyzed by perfectionism, share it with someone who needs to hear it.
Because the truth is, ambitious people aren't lazy. They're just terrified of being beginners. And once you give yourself permission to be bad at something, everything changes.
You stop waiting for motivation and you just dive in. You stop mapping out your perfect future and you start doing messy, imperfect work today.
And go back and check out some of our previous episodes too. We talk a lot about building sustainable habits and overcoming mental blocks.
Take care of yourselves, everyone. Be kind to your minds. And remember, action precedes motivation.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.